A ship carrying 300,000 tons of soybeans docked in China. The paperwork was perfect. The labels said Argentina. Customs ran one single test, and honestly, the whole lie fell apart in hours. There is a trade war happening right now between the two most powerful economies on Earth. And most people think it is being fought in boardrooms, in government offices, in congressional hearings. But one of its most revealing battles was fought inside a Chinese port warehouse, over a pile of beans. In April 2025, a massive cargo vessel completed a 10-day ocean crossing and pulled into Tianjin port. It was carrying 300,000 tons of soybeans. The shipping documents were clean. The certificates of origin clearly stated, "Product of Argentina." On the surface, completely routine. Then the lab results came back. And what Chinese customs discovered in those results did not just expose a smuggling operation. It blew open a story about desperation, deception, and the hidden cost of a trade war that neither side seems willing to end. Stay with me, because this story goes much deeper than soybeans. Part 1. How the trade war created a crisis for American farmers. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in early 2025, one thing was immediately clear. China was, once again, at the top of his list. In February 2025, his administration announced a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. Many analysts assumed it was an opening move, aggressive posturing before a deal. They were wrong. By April 10, 2025, the total tariff rate the United States was imposing on Chinese goods had climbed to a jaw-dropping 145%. Beijing did not absorb those blows quietly. China hit back with surgical precision, targeting the products that would hurt American exporters the most. A 15% tariff on American coal and liquefied natural gas. A 10% tariff on crude oil, agricultural machinery, and heavy vehicles. Export controls on critical metals, tungsten, molybdenum, bismuth, and indium, materials American tech and defense manufacturers cannot easily replace. Then came the agricultural strikes, a 15% tariff on American chicken, wheat, corn, and cotton, a 10% tariff on pork, beef, seafood, fruits, and dairy. And then, quietly, without a formal announcement, China simply stopped buying American soybeans altogether. For most people, that last point barely registered. But for farmers across Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota, it was a catastrophe. Here is why. Part 2. The bean that runs the world. Soybeans are not glamorous, but honestly, they are arguably the most strategically important agricultural commodity on the planet. And nowhere is that more true than in China. China has 1.4 billion people to feed. For its three main staple crops, rice, wheat, and corn, the country has achieved near self-sufficiency. But soybeans are a completely different problem. In 2024, China produced just 20.62 million tons of soybeans domestically. Meanwhile, its actual demand was many times that figure. Soybeans are the backbone of China's animal feed industry. The country's massive pork sector, its poultry farms, its aquaculture operations. All of it runs on soybean meal as the primary protein source for livestock. The gap between what China grows and what China needs is staggering. In 2024, China imported a total of 157 million tons of grain, spending roughly $50.8 billion. Of that total, soybeans alone accounted for 105 million tons, a full 66% of all grain imports by volume. For every dollar China spends importing food, more than 70 cents goes toward buying soybeans from other countries. Now, those soybeans have traditionally come from two places, Brazil and the United States. Brazil is the dominant supplier. In 2024, China imported more than 74 million tons of Brazilian soybeans at a cost of nearly $26.9 billion. Close to 70% of total Chinese soybean imports. Argentina supplied a growing share, 4.1 million tons in 2024 at $374 per ton, with numbers rising fast heading into 2025. And the United States? In 2024, China imported more than 22 million tons of American soybeans, spending close to $9 billion. That $9 billion was the lifeline keeping hundreds of thousands of American farm families afloat. And then the tariffs killed it. Part 3. Desperation at the farm gate. The collapse did not happen overnight, but honestly, it really felt that way for the people living through it. At the peak of the U.S.-China soybean relationship in 2016, America exported 58.23 million tons of soybeans globally. China alone was absorbing 36.1 million tons of that. That's 62% of all U.S. soybean exports, representing 30% of total American soybean production. By 2024, those numbers had already fallen sharply, as years of trade tensions pushed Chinese buyers toward South American suppliers. U.S. soybean production dropped from 119 million tons to around 100 million tons. Chinese purchases of American beans fell from 36.1 million tons to 22.12 million tons. And then tariffs of 145% made what remained of that trade essentially impossible. American farmers were now sitting on mountains of soybeans with nowhere to send them, storage facilities filling up, prices dropping, loan payments coming due. That is when someone, somewhere in the American agricultural export chain, had an idea. If China would not buy American soybeans directly, what if the soybeans just stopped being American? Part 4. The scheme, beans in disguise. The operation was simple in concept, complex, costly, and ultimately disastrous in execution. American soybean exporters began shipping their product to South America, primarily Argentina and Brazil. Once there, the beans were repackaged into new bags, given forged certificates of origin, and loaded back onto ships bound for China, now wearing the identity of Argentine or Brazilian soybeans. Argentina was a logical choice for the disguise. It was already one of China's established soybean suppliers. The shipping routes were familiar. The trade relationship was legitimate and growing. An Argentine-labeled shipment would not raise immediate suspicion. In April 2025, one of these ships arrived at Tianjin port. 300,000 tons, Argentine documentation, professional-looking certificates, everything in order. On paper, it was seamless. In reality, it lasted about as long as it took to run a protein test. Part 5. How China cracked it open. What the people behind this scheme critically underestimated was the sophistication of what they were walking into. By 2024, China had completed a comprehensive upgrade of its customs AI detection system, achieving a traceability accuracy rate of 98%. This was not a system built for catching the occasional mislabeled package. It was built specifically for catching exactly this kind of large-scale agricultural origin fraud. The first red flag appeared in the laboratory. Here is something most people do not know. Soybeans carry a natural biochemical fingerprint. The protein content, the fatty acid profile, the isotopic signature, all of these characteristics are shaped by the specific soil, climate, and growing conditions of the region where the crop was produced. They cannot be faked by changing a label. Argentine soybeans, grown in the pampas under Argentine conditions, consistently test at protein content levels that do not exceed 34%. That is a documented, established baseline that Chinese customs labs have on file. This batch tested at 35.1%. That single number was enough to trigger a full investigation, but inspectors kept going. When they physically examined the cargo, they found American-manufactured grain bags, original U.S. packaging that had not been replaced. And when investigators pulled the vessel's GPS tracking history and reconstructed its actual navigation route, the trajectory did not match a straightforward Argentine export at all. Finally, advanced mass spectrometry was applied. comparing 12 biochemical indicators against reference databases of known soybean samples from growing regions around the world. The results confirmed everything. These were American soybeans dressed up as Argentine. The 300,000-ton shipment was rejected and sent back. Part 6. This was not the first time. Here is where the story gets even more interesting and, honestly, more damning. The April 2025 incident was not the first time this had happened. It was actually the second time. Back in 2024, a cargo ship arrived at a Chinese port carrying 200,000 tons of soybeans labeled as Argentine. The documentation was complete. The certificates looked legitimate. Chinese customs did not believe them anyway. Within 48 hours, less than 2 full days, inspectors had confirmed conclusively that the soybeans came not from Argentina, but from the American Midwest. The shipment was rejected. Someone should have learned from that. Instead, they apparently decided the solution was to try again with a 50% larger shipment. The result was identical. Part 7. The Brazil route. Same trick, same ending. Argentina was not the only cover story being used. The same operation was being attempted through Brazil, and honestly, it was a bit more sophisticated. Rather than simply relabeling American beans as Brazilian, some exporters were physically blending American soybeans with genuine Brazilian product before shipment, hoping the mix would pass biochemical testing. China had already built a system specifically designed to stop this. Every batch of soybeans exported from Brazil to China now must carry a blockchain-verified digital record, documenting the exact agricultural plot where the beans were grown, the harvest date, the processing facility, and the complete transportation route from farm to ship. This record is immutable. Any discrepancy automatically triggers a physical inspection. In just the fourth quarter of 2024, inspectors at Shandong Port alone intercepted 3 separate shipments of American soybeans disguised as Brazilian, with a combined declared value exceeding 20 million yuan. China had also built a real-time global soybean price monitoring system. If the price gap between Brazilian and American soybeans narrowed to less than 5%, a sign that blending or substitution might be happening, the algorithm automatically flagged it for review. When some Brazilian exporters tried to manufacture a price spike in February 2025 by spreading weather-related harvest scare stories, China released its strategic reserve stocks and suspended some orders. The manufactured spike collapsed immediately. The message was unmistakable. China was watching everything. Part 8. The victim no one is talking about. Here is the part of this story that deserves far more attention than it has received. Argentina had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. Argentine farmers did not organize the scheme. Argentine exporters did not participate in it. The Argentine government had no knowledge of it whatsoever. They were a cover story, used without their permission, without their knowledge, and without any consideration for the damage it would cause them. And the damage was real. China accounts for more than 70% of Argentina's total soybean export volume. When the scandal broke, some Chinese buyers did not pause to distinguish between genuine Argentine soybeans and American beans in Argentine packaging. They simply suspended contracts, canceled orders, stepped back from the relationship entirely. The Argentine Ministry of Agriculture filed a formal complaint with the World Trade Organization, publicly accusing the United States of destroying Argentine commercial interests and damaging the country's international reputation. Their estimate of the economic losses, $200 million. $200 million. Losses suffered by a country that committed no fraud and made no mistakes. In response, Argentina began negotiating with China to build a comprehensive soybean traceability certification system, a verification framework that would make Argentine soybean authentication one of the most rigorous in the world, specifically to protect against being used as a cover story again. Part 9. The global rules are changing. The consequences of this incident extended beyond any single country's trade relationship. In December 2024, the World Trade Organization convened a special session in Geneva to address the growing problem of agricultural origin fraud. The soybean incident was used as the central case study, a documented example of how sophisticated these operations had become, and how inadequate existing international trade regulations were at stopping them. The session launched a working group aimed at developing a globally unified framework for origin verification, standards that would require agricultural exporters worldwide to implement traceable, tamper-resistant documentation systems. Trade experts who attended have noted that the implications go far beyond soybeans. If robust verification standards can be mandated internationally for agricultural commodities, it would fundamentally restructure how global trade is documented and enforced, with consequences for coffee, cocoa, cotton, timber, and dozens of other globally traded goods. The soybean scandal, it turns out, may end up rewriting the rulebook for international trade documentation. Part 10. The real cost of a trade war. And now we arrive at the question that this entire story is really asking. Who actually pays when two governments decide to go to economic war with each other? The American senator who votes for 145% tariffs does not lose sleep over grain prices in Iowa. The Chinese trade negotiator in Beijing is not personally affected by the cost of pork at a wet market in Chengdu. But the farmer in Illinois who can no longer sell his harvest at a price that covers his mortgage, he pays. The Argentine agricultural communities whose contracts were canceled because of a fraud they did not commit, they pay. The small Argentine export companies that spent years building a reputation for quality and reliability only to have it used as someone else's disguise, they pay. The Chinese consumers facing higher food prices because the most cost-efficient foreign supplier has been politically cut off, they pay. The U.S.-China trade war has driven American soybean production down by roughly 19 million tons over 8 years. It has pushed some American agricultural businesses toward fraudulent schemes that have now damaged their country's standing with neutral trading partners. It has cost Argentina $200 million in collateral damage. It has forced China to build the world's most sophisticated food supply chain surveillance network. And at the end of all of that, China still needs 105 million tons of soybeans every year. American farmers still need buyers who can absorb their harvest. The fundamental economic logic has not changed. Only the costs have gone up, for everyone who was never in the room when the decisions were made. Closing. The line that stays with you. A ship arrived in China carrying 300,000 tons of soybeans and a lie. The lie lasted about as long as it took to run a lab test. But the story behind that lie, the desperation that created it, the collateral damage it left behind, the global regulatory changes it set in motion, that story is still unfolding. Soybeans are just beans. But in 2025, they became a mirror, reflecting back to us exactly what a trade war costs when you strip away the political language and look honestly at who is holding the bill. The cargo ship went home empty. The question worth sitting with is this. In a conflict where both sides keep escalating and ordinary people keep absorbing the damage, what exactly does winning look like? You just watched a $9 billion trade relationship collapse, and a 300,000-ton secret get exposed by a protein reading. That is the world we are living in right now. Trade wars do not stay in government offices. They end up in port warehouses, on family farms, and on your grocery receipt. If this story made you see the bigger picture differently, if it made you think about what global decisions actually cost at the ground level, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because every week we go beyond the headlines into the stories that actually explain why the world works the way it does. We will see you in the next one.